Thank you. No, no, it wasn't.
Hi, Professor Aili. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Fantastic. Great. Okay, we're going to get started in a few minutes.
Okay. Are you going to remove the discussion off the? Yeah. Okay. No, it went off. Okay, good.
Okay, great. Fantastic.
Hello.
We're waiting for a couple people.
Okay.
So we'll officially start at 4:30. You can switch off your timer if you'd like.
Okay.
And just in a couple of minutes we'll start.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah. It's time, so. Yes. So I think we've just called her, so yeah, there she is. Okay. Good evening, everyone. If we could all get settled into our seats and we'll kick off this evening's session. So a warm welcome to each and every one of you. My name is Maggie Milioni. I'm the Business Development Manager here at Mkuki and Nyota. Thank you for taking time out this evening to join us here for the launch of Joan Wicken. As you can see, we already have Professor Aili online with us, ready to kick off. Professor Aili, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. So we'll start in a few minutes. Before we kick off this evening's discussion, I think I'd like to welcome onto our stage our speakers for this evening. I think we'll start with our host for this evening, so Mr. Walter Bgoya, Mkuki na Nyota Chairman, Karibu Sana, if you could join us up here. And Mheshimiwa Zitto Kabwe, please, if you could also have you join us up on stage, Karibu Sana. Right, fantastic. I'll let you guys get settled in a bit.
Mm.
Right, okay, great. I guess everyone is settled in. So without further ado, I think we won't delay things anymore. So being cognizant of time, I think we'll kick off the discussion. So Mzee na Mheshimiwa, karibuni sana, and we can kick off.
I had planned to make a few comments, but is that okay? Just to kind of summarize the book.
Yes, sure, please go ahead.
It's maybe 15 minutes. Is that okay with you? I thought maybe just to give an overview of the book.
You can
Yeah, gauging from the audience. Yeah, I think that'd be great. Fantastic.
Okay. Yeah, so well, first I'd like to just begin by thanking Walter Bgoya and Tapiwa Muchechemera and also Mkuki na Nyota for publishing the book. Oh no, I can't. Can you see me? Something went wrong. I lost.
We can still see you.
You can see me. Okay, I can't
Yeah.
see you. All right. Yeah, and I'm also very grateful for the honorable to come and be here to talk to me and talk to us about the book. And I'll be very eager to hear from others who knew Joan Wicken and Mwalimu Nyerere. Joan Wicken was the personal assistant and speechwriter to President Nyerere, and he worked for him for over 45 years. I interviewed her in Keighley, Britain in 2000, 4 years before she died. There's probably nobody who knew Nyerere better, at least as a politician. And so I wanted to talk to her. Nyerere had died in 1999, and I thought it would be a good time to talk to her. She knew a lot. I knew she knew a lot. And I had known her since I was a child. My family had moved to Tanzania in 1990, and she lived near us in Kurasini. So we saw her from time to time. She was basically Nyerere's alter ego. Tanzania's first Attorney General, Roland Brown, called Joan Wicken the mirror of Julius Nyerere's mind. Professor Cranford Pratt, who was the first principal at the University of Dar es Salaam, described her as the power behind the throne. Saida Yahya Othman, who was one of the authors of the wonderful 3-volume biography of Nyerere with Isa Shivji and Ngwanza Kamata that came out in 2020. She said that Joan Wicken was a constant shadow behind Nyerere, and like a shadow, sometimes preceding the subject and projecting a considerable impression. So this interview, the book is based on this interview. It provides the first kind of in-depth window into Wicken's own account of her relationship with President Nyerere. But it also provides a glimpse into the life of this intensely private woman who had very strong views and convictions. The collaboration between Nyerere and Joan was so extensive and their views were so similar that people often couldn't tell the difference. In the interview, Joan says as much when she observes that we were at one on basic principles. Like her, she felt that he never compromised on basic principles. And so this interview kind of pulls back the veil on this very enigmatic woman who had a had a hand in shaping Nyerere's presidency, and one could say perhaps even Tanzania's history. Yet paradoxically, she took no credit for anything. So I'm going to show show a few pictures here to go along with some of my comments. Let's see. Yeah. Can you see the screen? You can see it?
Yes, we can.
Good. So just by way of background, I grew up in Tanzania, actually Tanganyika initially, from 1960 to 74 as the daughter of Marilisa Swans, who came to Tanganyika as a teacher in Ashira in 1952 and later taught at the University of Dar es Salaam in Bralop. My father was Lloyd Swans, who worked with the Lutheran World Federation. Among other things, he was a pastor at Azania Front Lutheran Church and also a congregation in Magogoni. In the early years, we visited Joan at her home in the Salvation Army compound in Kurasini, so we didn't live too far from her, but later on we moved then to Mbezi. I interviewed Joan the first time in 1987, and when I was carrying out research for my book on the informal economy in Tanzania, the Miradi Midogo Midogo, and I looked at how urban dwellers were surviving and enduring severe economic hardship by participating in the informal economy. And then I also interviewed her again in 1994, and then for this book. Joan herself was born in July 1925 on the outskirts of London in Plumstead. Her father was a factory worker and a trade unionist. Her mother was ill during her formative years and died when she was 7. Joan and her sister were raised by her aunt and her father. But she was very strongly influenced by her father and his identification with the Labour Party. After finishing secondary school at 15, she worked as a clerk in a garage where she learned shorthand, typing, and bookkeeping. She fought in World War II with anti-aircraft operating radar equipment, and she said it was very secret and I was very inefficient. And this is typical Joan. She, unlike most people, she was brutally honest about her own shortcomings. Wicken first met Nyerere when she worked at the Commonwealth Office of the Labour Party in 1956, and he invited her to visit Tanganyika. She then traveled to Kenya, Ghana, Tanganyika, and the Federation of Rhodesia and Nyasaland between 56 and 57. On a fellowship from Oxford University, which she had attended. Nyerere then was the chairman of TANU, and Wicken was really drawn to him from the outset. She saw him as a philosopher and someone who could relate to ordinary people. At the time, he was touring Tanganyika, making the case for independence, and so she joined him on part of his tour. She found Tanganyika to be the most interesting of the countries she visited, and her experiences there left a real impression on her. In the report that she wrote then, she described Nyerere as an extremely modest person who was often embarrassed by his popularity among ordinary people. She was in Tanganyika at the time when Nyerere was banned from public speaking, but he spoke anyway, and she witnessed him giving several talks around the country, and in her report really captured the enthusiasm with which people embraced Nyerere and the force for independence that he represented. She found that same enthusiasm in the rural areas as they traveled 600 miles throughout the country. Later, then, Wicken returned to Tanganyika in 1960 on behalf of the Tanganyika Education Trust, and she then helped set up Kivukoni College along the lines of Ruskin College in UK. It's a college for adults, and a college that she also had attended for 2 years. She was a big advocate of adult education and a big champion of adult education. And at that time, it was primarily for adult education. It wasn't, later on, I think the college evolved into more of an ideological school, but at that time it was adult education. And so Wicken toured the country and raised funds from ordinary citizens for the college. And many Tanzanians who later became leaders of the country had their beginnings at this college. In 1960, she started working as a speechwriter and personal assistant to Nyerere. She was initially hired by the British Civil Service in 1960 to help Nyerere prepare for independence. She also helped write the inaugural independence speech. She drafted Nyerere's policy statements and speeches and books in English, putting his ideas on paper. Generally, they were the product of lengthy discussions and exchanges of drafts between them. It's also worth noting that many of Tanzania's foundational documents and policies were first written in English and later translated into Swahili, something that future linguists should perhaps consider, and what the impact of this might have had on the formulation of some ideas. Although she denied influencing Tanzanian politics, she certainly must have had a hand in articulating some of these policies as part of the State House team. So she remained then in this post as speechwriter and assistant to Nyerere from the time when he was chief minister to president, through his party chairmanship. And then after he stepped down from that, he was the head of the South Commission, which then morphed into the South Center, and she was with him throughout all these various positions. And later on, she helped set up the Nyerere Foundation in Dar es Salaam. I first came to know her I should say, just, when I first came to know her when she was living in the Salvation Army. She lived the whole time in the Salvation Army compound. She used to drive a little scooter initially, and then a small white Fiat. She had a tiny little cottage with a thatched roof, a little bougainvillea going up the side. Sometimes she would entertain people for tea. I remember seeing piles of books all around her, very busy one-room house. With books and papers all strewn all over the house. But she was a very frugal woman. She didn't seek any special privileges or accommodations, and this was of great pride to her. She had been offered a larger house, but she turned it down. She wanted to live in a more modest residence. She didn't wear makeup. She dressed in simple clothes. She sewed herself. She baked her own bread, made her own sandwiches. And she, didn't really put on airs or expect to be treated differently than most ordinary Tanzanians. Wicken shunned lavish displays of wealth. When she retired, she refused to accept a large resettlement compensation to offset the expenses of moving to the UK. She retired in Keighley in northern Britain. And even there, she continued this modest lifestyle with sparse belongings when I visited her. She had a very strict work ethic while at the State House in Tanzania. She didn't tolerate office gossip or tardiness or laziness or unnecessary talk on the phone. According to Anna Mwansasu, who unfortunately couldn't be with us today, but she wrote the foreword to the book, and she was Wicken's assistant. Anyway, she was apparently had a good sense of humor and was sociable, gave up her travel allowances to be shared equally among other staff workers, and worked late into the night, but generally spent late afternoons at Nyerere's home in Msasani talking to the president from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m., discussing the day's events and planning the upcoming schedule. She also traveled quite a bit with him. She met many dignitaries, as you can imagine, and the ones that most impressed her were Chao Enlai, Castro, and Olof Palme, who was instrumental. He was Swedish and was instrumental in providing a lot of funding for education in Tanzania. Yahya Othman notes that the long hours she spent with Nyerere sometimes upset his wife, Maria Nyerere, from time to time. Wicken in the interview steered clear of talking about these tensions and spoke only in very positive terms about Maria Nyerere. She also appreciated her important role in single-handedly raising the family with little support from Nyerere, who admitted that he didn't do much to support the family. And unlike most other first ladies, she wasn't afforded any or many special privileges. Her relationship, Wicken's relationship with Nyerere was a professional one. It was based on political affinity and friendship. The love of her life actually was a Kenyan, Tom Mboya, whom she had met in England when he was studying industrial management at Ruskin College. Nyerere knew about that relationship and sympathized that they weren't able to marry or pursue the relationship. Mboya married a Kenyan, but perhaps because of her working for Nyerere, it was an impossible relationship, and for other reasons. And for those of you who are younger, Mboya was an independence activist, founder of the Kenya African National Union, who later held numerous cabinet positions and was assassinated, probably a political assassination, at the age of 38. What comes through in the interviews is, Wicken's, she's, intelligence, her self-awareness, lots of confident assertions, and her self-deprecating humor. She was totally herself, very British, yet at the same time, very much at one with Nyerere's goals for Tanzania as an individual entrenched in the political establishment of Dar es Salaam. It's clear they had many common running jokes. Wicken herself was a woman of many contradictions. On the one hand, she was very opinionated, very self-assured in her beliefs, such as her unwavering support for socialism. She had a sharp tongue. She was a gatekeeper to Nyerere. But on the other hand, she completely submerged her own need for recognition behind Nyerere's agenda. No doubt this was a function of her role as speechwriter and assistant, and also of the fact that she was not Tanzanian, something that she was very acutely cognizant of. And there were lines that she would not cross. She was very sensitive about her positionality as an outsider. At one point, she says, "I used to get horrified at the way some people, meaning foreigners, thought they had all the answers. I didn't ever feel that, but I would argue from my own background." And so I have no doubt that she spoke freely with Nyerere, but all the while maintaining this kind of a deferential, hidden public persona. And as a result, Nyerere trusted her implicitly. She made a point of not drawing attention to herself and taking credit to anything. I mean, I tried to push her on this, and it just, there was nothing there. She just wouldn't. When I asked her what her contribution was, she said, "I made Mwalimu's job a little bit easier on the margins. I was helpful to him more than anything else." Her not wanting to recognition came through. She wanted to stay out of the limelight. And I don't think it's a coincidence that one finds her visible in many state photos, but she's always in the background. You can see here in this photo, she's in the sitting in the background. That's where you see her poring over her notes. I found only one official photo where she was in the foreground, and that was the one that's on the cover of this of the book. When she met the Queen of England, but interestingly, the Queen of England got cut out of the cover. I'm sure it's the only time that the Queen of England got cut out of the cover of a picture, or got cut out of a picture. But anyway, I like the cover. But Joan made all these, constantly made these self-deprecating comments about, downplaying her own importance, but also, how terrible she was in French and math as a student. She was deficient in economics when she was in some public debate in England, when she was working for the Labour Party. She talks about what a terrible daughter she was to her father and a terrible first secretary to the Africa Education Trust. But she was a very confident person, but she just didn't, she was also very realistic about what her limitations were. She was obviously more than an assistant. One of the questions that I had was, was this relationship, she's clearly a foreigner, and was there the worry that, or the concern that she might be working for some other external interests, and there were expressions expressed at the time that she might have been used by the British, but I think it's highly unlikely, given her allegiance to Nyerere and to non-alignment. If anything, it was Nyerere who used her to interpret British and American objectives. And she herself seemed to believe that her reporting on the foreign diplomats to him was a way of ensuring that he knew what she was up to and that she wasn't compromised in any way. She also once got mad at the British High Commissioner for calling her Joan. She said to him, "Would you please stop calling me Joan? My name is Miss Wicken." So anyway, to understand Wicken, one had to understand Nyerere and vice versa. Yahya Othman astutely notes that in her personal correspondence, she often used the collective we to refer to her, Nyerere, and the Tanzanian government combined. And I noticed the same pattern in the interview as well. When some of the times she's talking about her and Nyerere and as we, and then the other times she's clearly referring to the country or the government of Tanzania as well. Her identity was so intertwined with that of Nyerere and Tanzania that she couldn't separate them in her own mind. When I asked her in 1994 about some of the failures of the overreach of the state in economic development, she responded, "Look, we didn't know any more than anyone else about what we were doing. Nobody did. We did what seemed right at the time. We did the best we could." She also felt that the donors should have taken some of the blame, and she was very critical of donor arrogance. At the time, I asked if Nyerere regretted anything, and she said that there was remorse over environmental issues. Nyerere felt he had not done enough in that area, and that this was something he was trying to rectify at the time through the South Commission. Much of her personality comes through in the comments about what she valued in Nyerere. She respected him above all for his concern for the general welfare of people, his egalitarianism, his desire to uplift the poor. Sharp income differentials deeply disturbed her. In the interview also, Wicken highlights how Nyerere fought against tribalism. Not only did he develop policies and institutions that reinforced national unity, but he set an example for others to emulate. And he was particularly appalled by the rise of tribalism after President Mwinyi took over, and he continued to fight against it. She was especially taken by his simplicity, and which was, of course, her own hallmark. In her eulogy to him when he died, she noted that he was particularly irritated when his vehicle drove out of the State House and soldiers would blow a bugle and force the traffic off the road. And he felt that it was due to a growing insistence on pomposity and ostentation, and worried that he was fast becoming the worst public nuisance in the city of Dar es Salaam. Wicken appreciated that he was a good listener and listened to anyone he talked to, regardless of their position in society. He points out in the interview that he may not have always agreed, but he listened attentively nevertheless. He arrived at his own judgments and decisions and took responsibility for his own decisions. She found him to be well organized and considerate. He was punctual and didn't complain much. He had difficulty saying no to people. She talked about how he was a joyful and lively man. She said that if you felt really depressed, you had to talk and had a chance to talk to Mwalimu, you always came back more cheerful. This was not because he thought things were easy. He didn't, nor because he took the easy way out of difficult decisions. She also made the point that he would say that you are not defeated on anything until you've given up. And that's the worst sin. The worst sin is despair. The only unforgivable sin, he told me, Wicken, is despair. And he took that stance on the unity of Africa, the development of the South, the unity and cooperation of countries in the South. She also loved the way he made people laugh when he gave speeches in Swahili at mass rallies, and he persuaded people with laughter. The only time she saw him angry was when the dignity of Tanzania or the dignity of individuals was questioned. And I remember this. I saw Nyerere several times. He visited our family's home, and I do recall him being a very lighthearted person and easy to smile and laugh. And this is something she appreciated about him very much. I asked her what Nyerere was most proud of in terms of his accomplishments, and she said it was the peace and unity that Tanzania had enjoyed since independence, in spite of the skirmishes with Uganda during Idi Amin's time. He was also proud of the fact that he believed people felt the government was on their side during his presidency. He was pleased with his role in the non-aligned movement and in helping liberate Southern Africa. When I asked about his main regrets, she said he bitterly regretted sending 3 men to Zanzibar for questioning after the Zanzibar Revolution, and 2 were killed in an extrajudicial manner. Nyerere worked for the unity and cooperation in the region, and she emphasized that it was, he did this through agreement and persuasion. He worked hard to create the East African Federation, but that failed, much to his dismay. Nevertheless, he was able to forge a union with Zanzibar in 1964. Wicken reveals that this union was to him sacred. And even after he was president, the union was one of the 3 things he spoke about openly, even though he tried not to interfere too much with the presidency of his successor. From the interview, it's clear that his main concerns after stepping down as president in 1990 were the future of Zanzibar's relationship with the mainland, corruption among country's leaders, and the country's losing its sovereignty and self-reliance under pressure for reform from the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. And that was something that she really admired about him, that he pushed back against pressure from the donors, and in particular the IMF. And in terms of some of the moments that were the most challenging for him, it really was the one that she kind of singled out was the 1964 mutiny. And it really pained him to no end to have to resort to bringing in British troops. He saw that only as a last resort when it was clear that there was no other option. But for him, that was the most frightening time in Tanzania's history. I asked about other moments in the history, but you'll have to read the book. I won't tell you everything, but you can read the book and learn more about some of the other moments that were quite critical. I asked her about some of her disagreements with him, because in spite of their commonalities, they had a few differences, as you can imagine, over 45 years. And in particular, she mentioned the treatment of Bibi Titi, and how she felt that Bibi Titi had been used and exploited, and got into things over her head, and was really not. She said she was innocent in the strongest sense of the word. She did not realize what was happening. She also had differences with Nyerere around the closing down of the Ruvuma Development Association, and had some differences over women's rights. Yeah, here's BBTT pictured. She had been, very much the equal of Nyerere during the pre-independence period, and had gone around, especially the coastal areas, and was a very articulate spokesperson for independence alongside Nyerere. She talked about his friends, Amir Jamal being one of the closest friends for the longest period of time. I think he was perhaps his closest associate and friend. Here he is again pictured with Wicken with the South Commission in '87. In the last years of her life, when she was living in Keighley, England, she continued then to work with the South Commission and the South Centre, and wrote Nyerere speeches. And then she was also writing up her notes about her work with Nyerere that were put in the archives, in Bodleian archives at Oxford University. She took up drawing and painting, and gave some talks, but her health made it difficult for her to travel, and she very guiltily had to stop working for Nyerere. Nyerere's death then brought a close to their lifelong collaboration. Wicken herself died of pneumonia in 2004 after being hospitalized at the age of 79. She had been a lifelong atheist and did not want a religious ceremony. The ceremony, which was held in Keighley, ended with the playing of the upbeat New Orleans jazz piece, Panama Rag by Louis Armstrong. So those are my rather lengthy introductory comments. I hope that I didn't take up too much time here. But I thought it would be good to give an overview of some of the issues that are dealt with in the interview.
Thank you so much, Aili. And I'd like to take opportunity to welcome all of you here. We did not. We started with an introduction from the author. Aili married Tripp about the book that we are launching today. I'll be moderating the session. After the introduction, we'll have some few questions to her, and then to Mr. Bgoya to make some remarks about Joan Wicken, and then I'll open the floor for discussion. Just as a recap, the book is about an interview that Aili did to Joan Wicken, the personal assistant to President Nyerere, and then chairperson of the CCM party then, and the South-South Commission. It was an interview of just 2 days, March 2nd and 3rd, that produced this book. And then a follow-up interview, as she said, by her mother on a month after. I think it was a month after, in April 2000. Then there is a lot of background in the book in order to bring the context. And most of the backgrounds have been taken from various work that has been done with other researchers. Some of them are here, and you will hear some of the comments given. So I have very few questions to open the discussions to you. Some of the questions were to be directed to Anna, but she's not here. And I think you'll be able to pick some of these questions. One, in the forward, Anna Monsasu describes Joan, or Miss Wicken, as a special figure in Julius Nyerere's political life. And there are two quotations that you had. One from Roland Brown, which I saw also from the volume 1 of the Nyerere biography by Saida and her colleagues, that Roland Brown said she was a mirror in Julius Nyerere's mind. And the third was also quoted by Saida as part of the the volume of the books that her and colleagues Kamata and Shibi wrote that she quoted Butiku saying she was a giant in her own right. Nyerere had so many assistants, whether personal or other assistants. What made Joan Wicken that special, or that giant, or that mirror of Nyerere's mind, from your interviews with her or from the conversations we had with her?
Yeah, I think many of the things that I've already referenced, I think made her special. But I think also just the length of, she worked for such a long time with Nyerere, for over 45 years. And so they had a kind of a rapport, and he trusted her. He knew that they thought along very similar lines. I think he had a similar, not an identical relationship, but he was also very close to Paul Sosigwa, who was the press secretary and did the translations of these speeches into Swahili. So he had other relationships that were also close, but I think this one was, and I don't know. I mean, I'm not in a position to say it was more important than with Jamal or others, but it was a very significant relationship, and it was because it was long-standing. I think that perhaps gave it more salience.
And another question out of the two is, you said it here, but also we read from other books that there was a feeling that Joan Wicken was used by the British to manage Mwalimu out of the Soviet cycle. Did you ask her in your interview how she felt about accusations like this, and what was her reaction?
Yeah, so yes, thank you for the question. She felt, I mean, I did ask her about this, and she felt that her insurance against being suspected, I mean, she was clear in her mind that she wasn't being used by anybody. She was her own person, but I think that she felt that she would report on, she'd go and talk to the British High Commissioner or the American ambassador, and then she would pass along information, because they thought, well, okay, she's British, we can talk to her. So she would pass information then back to Nyerere, and so she felt that was kind of her insurance, that he would then know that she was working for him, not for anybody else. So that was how she explained it. I wanted to say one more thing about why she had the she herself explained her relationship with him. And that was also, she said that unlike some of the other people who worked at the State House, she was the same age as him, and she had known him before, quite a long time before independence, when he was traveling in Britain trying to build support for independence. And so because of that long-standing relationship, she also had his confidence. So she felt that it was, and that they were peers in terms of their age.
Thank you. I come to you, Mr. Bgoya. At least you saw her, you met Joan, you saw her working for Mwalimu, and I'll start with this question because there is that feeling, and also Saida wrote about it in the book that actually Mkuki published that book. What will be your reaction on it? And please be honest about this accusation being Joan managing Mwalimu or smoothing Mwalimu away from the Soviet cycle during that time of the Cold War.
First of all, let me say that there were people in Joan Wicken's.
The mic, please. Yeah.
Is this on now?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there were people who were in that cycle, Joan Wicken's cycle, and those people who were not in Joan Wicken's cycle. I think I was in the middle. Sometimes I was acceptable on her side, but I think most of the time I was not acceptable. I was acceptable because when I was in the Foreign Office, we had to work to some extent with Mwalimu because he was our foreign minister. But I remember that one of my first contradictions with the ministry was that we were required to do drafts of speeches for President Nyerere when he received ambassadors and other officials. And so we were just beginning the foreign service, and we would make the drafts. Now, the drafts would go to Joan Wicken, but we never heard anything afterwards. We were never told whether our work was good or bad. And so, not very unlike me, after several months, I asked, why in the world were we doing work which was neither appreciated nor accepted? Why were we having to do this work? And rather than answer the question, they removed the practice. We didn't have to write the speeches anymore. That was already telling, in my view, about what she thought about some of us or some of our positions of our work. But let me do two things here. One, say that yes, she was a gatekeeper, but gatekeeping is not always a bad thing. In fact, most PAs, gatekeeping is one of the jobs that one has to do, because obviously the president could not meet everybody. So somebody had to decide that some people will see the president for whatever reason, and some people wouldn't see the president, again, for other reasons. Now, I think what became more and more evident for some of us was certain kind of people among the left were not accepted in the cycles of Mwalimu. And to be just simply straight, Marxists were not a group to hang out with. In fact, Marxists were to be kept away. Now, some of us were not Marxists entirely. We were sort of fellow travelers, so we could pass sometimes. Joan was an English woman, par excellence. And she was steamed in British culture, par excellence again. So it does not surprise me, and shouldn't be surprised anybody, that she had the skills that are very quintessential English. Certain kind of ability to not show what you think or by just how you look. The body language will say a lot. She was obviously very well read, articulate, knew obviously the history of British labor movement and so on and so forth. And let's also now jump. Mwalimu was also, and I don't think it's really bad to say, quintessentially a learner of British politics. He knew British politics very well, Mwalimu. And let me also say further, he regaled in a certain kind of intellectual community that Britain and British universities gave. So it was therefore, in my view, not really different that you find a certain kind of intellectual link between the two coming from a certain kind of background, same age, etc., etc. Because clearly, it could not just be simply professional, because even within professionalism, there is a liking for somebody. And I think these two people genuinely liked each other. So that facilitated the work. She was a brilliant shorthand keeper. By the way, this is a skill that people do not realize how important it could be at that stage. She was a researcher. I think she lived, it's hard to say, 25 hours for Mwalimu every day. Now, that kind of loyalty, that kind of incredible attachment to a leader is impressive in its own right, but it's extremely important in the extent to which the identities of ideas of these people and the practice will obviously sometimes emerge. I don't see anything particularly wrong with that, except where, in my view, a leader begins to move from being ready to listen to the plethora of ideas and limit certain ideas from the leader. Why would Mwalimu not want to meet Marxists, for instance? Because Marxism and Marxist theoretician thinkers at the time had something to say about where we were going, where we were. So for John to keep Marxists away from Mwalimu was an injustice, in my view, to Mwalimu, to herself, and to us. But we already know that she was rabidly anti-Marxist.
We read from...
No. Before I finish, to the extent that she broke up with her boyfriend, it is in the books, because she did not see herself going to vote Labour, and this man she was hanging out with going to vote Communist Party. So she threw him out. Well, I mean, in the manner of speaking. So you can see the importance of this. Now, everything else could follow. The Marxist, the communist link, the whatever would follow from this analysis. But let us just leave it there for now.
Yeah, from biography of Mwalimu by Shivji Kamata and Saida, there is an example of Professor Mkandawire. Professor Mkandawire, who wanted to invite Mwalimu to Uganda for the opening of a conference, and Mkandawire was invited to Dar with Joan for the preparation of that. And then Mkandawire did not get any response from Mwalimu or Joan until they met during the launch of the South report, I think. And Mkandawire, in the conversation with Mwalimu, he told Mwalimu that we invited you. And Mwalimu said, no, I was not invited. And Joan was there. And I said, but I was invited. And I even came to Dar. I came to Dar, I met Joan's. And Mwalimu looked at Joan's like, what is it? I did not see this invitation. So it confirms that. But I wanted to push back a bit. I'll quote what Aili said in the book. And you, because you worked during that time, you were there, and maybe you can say more. Aili said the interview, this book, pulls the veil back on this enigmatic woman who had hand in shaping Nyerere's presidency. As a foreign service official, as far as foreign policy was concerned, do you agree with Aili that Joan shaped Mwalimu's presidency?
Well, this is another area which I think is important. I had a discussion actually yesterday morning with Mr. Butiku, Joseph Butiku, who was in fact above. He was the assistant to Nyerere, and all these other assistants were below him. And so his take was that there was no such a thing as John influencing Nyerere's policies. John only helped put together, perhaps in speeches, what Mwalimu decided upon. In other words, because this is also interesting, by the way, because I have heard people, particularly in the diaspora, who say, oh, so Mwalimu was just basically being run by this white woman, what the hell is this? And so we thought this man was a great thinker, and all this was being done by this little white woman from UK. Well, I mean, I'm using these words by the, not me, this is not my, is what I mean. So, but, and I really to some extent want to state that I really doubt that Nyerere would be any more influenced by Joan Wicken than I, if in a different context, I had the same arguments to raise to him. And I have had some arguments.
Are you not just defending Mwalimu?
No. I'm defending my, why shouldn't I, by the way?
Eh?
Why shouldn't I? No, let me, hey, please. I don't want Nyerere to be a puppet because he was not. And any idea that he was a puppet is completely unacceptable and ridiculous. You know, but what I'm saying is that, and by the way, today we have all these gadgets helping us. Can you imagine somebody who would be a little bit of a Google for you, because they had taken their shorthand on minutes everywhere, and therefore you could always come up and say, hey, what happened at that time? And they could give you that answer. Do you realize how important that person could be? Google is not deciding the policy, but Google is helping you recall the information that you receive here and there. So Google does not become therefore the policymaker. Okay? Yes, but surely enough, these people working together, its ideas become kind of symbiotic. See, I give, you know, hey, did you realize this? Did you do this? Now, what I would like to say here, I think by the books, for instance, that Joan Wicken selected for Mwalimu, Joan Wicken influenced Mwalimu's thinking. Yes, because it, okay. I don't think, for instance, that Joan Wicken would recommend a book on Marxism or Marxist analysis to Mwalimu. Although the book would be probably the best analysis, she would not recommend it to him.
I'll come back to you.
Yes, of course.
Yeah,
Yes.
before
Can
then we'll go back to
No problem.
To the audience.
No
I
problem.
want to come back to
Could
you.
I just interject?
I'm coming to
Oh.
you, Aili. I want to ask you a question that everyone would like to know. Some of us, when you saw this book of yours, we thought those notes that were told that they have been kept for 30 years are out now. And we got a lot of questions about that. And you had a chance in the last 4 years of her life. First, are those notes there? Did you happen to see some of them?
No, she was putting them into the library at Oxford University for 30. I think it was the embargo of 30 years. So it'll be another 10 years or so, or less, that until they're available. So no, and she was transcribing her. They were in shorthand, and so she was transcribing them and putting them into some readable form. So no, we won't have that. Won't have access to them for a few more years. But I just wanted to interject earlier on that, you know, on this issue of, she herself was categorical, and I asked her many times, like, what was your, what role did you play? What influence did you have? Zero, nothing. She always said that was her answer. And she said that I made Mwalimu's life a little bit easier. That's all I did. And so she was very clear that she felt that she didn't have an impact, but it was my interpretation that if anybody who spends 45 years talking to somebody is going to have something, and because she was the sounding board, and she challenged him on things, and she would say, what about this, what about that, and he would respond, and they'd go back and forth. And I know that as a professor, I know that when you write, and you write something, you put it down, it is a form of thinking and analysis. And so it's just an impossibility. I don't think that she didn't write the Arusha Declaration. She didn't shape, the fundamental policies, but she had some hand, I think, in some of this. So that's all I'm saying, that even though she would deny it, I think that there must have been some influence. But no, she was not the person, she was not, pulling the strings or anything like that. Nyerere was, he had his own thoughts, and she was very clear about that.
Thank you so much. I'll come to the audience if there is any question to the author. For those who have read the book, or even those who haven't, if you have any question that would like Aili to respond to. Saida.
No
We have
pressing
quoted you a lot. Professor Saida.
Thank you. Since my name has been mentioned so much, I thought I should get it out of the way so that it's not mentioned. Aili M. Saida. I'm very happy to meet you.
Likewise.
Yes, I start by joining, agreeing with what Walter was saying about John's recommendations. Is this one?
Yeah. And closer. Closer.
Okay. John's recommendations of books for Mwalimu to read. Yeah, I think she was extremely influential in that. So Mwalimu might have some ideas from friends that he met from his travels of what books to read, but most of the time it was John who recommended the books for him to read. And there is, we found evidence in the research where she says, she writes the publishers, say, or the people who are ordering journals and so on, don't order this journal anymore because Mwalimu doesn't read it. Mwalimu doesn't like it. But if you check the journals, they are mostly the leftist journals. So she left the other ones to continue to be ordered, but she canceled the leftist leaning journals. But the question I had for you, Aili, was we've talked about how similar their characters were. Their simplicity, their humility, and I'm saying humility in inverted commas. So they had a lot of things in common. But did you find that both of them were intellectually very arrogant? That both Mwalimu and John were intellectually arrogant. They did not suffer fools. They didn't want to hear people who did not know stuff. People who were not intellectually highly developed, because they themselves were. So basically, they were interested in people who were at their own intellectual level. As our friend Chachage used to say, who were in the ozone layer. Okay, they did not want to hear others who did not have ideas which were similar to theirs, not in terms of their ideology, but in terms of their intellectual capacity. So when you were talking to her, did you find that that was the case?
Thank you, Saida. Anyone else? Maybe we take two before she responds. Yes, Kamata, another author.
Thank you very much. Good evening. I only have two observations which the author could respond to. One is about dual citizenship. You mentioned about Barbara Johnson having dual citizenship. As far as I know, it wasn't possible, given the citizenship bill that was discussed in 1961. A lot of discussion. So I'm not sure, because Bryson had to give away one of his citizenship for him to be a minister in the Tanganyikan parliament, cabinet. Okay, that's one. Two is about Joseph Kabila. No, not Joseph Kabila. Kabila the father. I'm not sure if we did go to the University of Dar es Salaam. Those two quick observations.
Okay.
Okay. Any last one, so that, yes, Karibu.
Thank you. My name is Linda, and just a proud Tanzanian. Yeah, my question is the notes or the shorthand that are now the property, so to speak, of Oxford, shouldn't those be the property of a museum in Tanzania? And so were there any discussions around the ownership of those notes or those shorthand? One. And two, what were the dynamics of their discussion? Because you see, if you have an advisor, the way we operate is, you know, the boss is there, you talk, yeah, ideas you can come across and say, okay, this is what I think, cross whatever, and there it is. And so I'm interested to know what were the dynamics of their discussions. The 1 hour they would have in Sasani would be a back and forth, or was it, okay, this is what I think, you look at it and then come back to me with your thinking? And were they lively discussions or debates, or what kind? I wanted to just understand that, the dynamics between the discussions between the two of them. Thank you.
Aili, you can go ahead.
I'll try. These are very interesting questions. Yeah, about the question about the intellectual arrogance. I mean, I think that it was there, but I think it was also kind of a blindness to it, because she didn't feel that she was, you know, she felt that she stood, and Nyerere stood for the poor people, for the little people, for the, you know, that was how her, and she had a very, very strong, you know, she was a very strongly socialist, but not in a, but like you said, not in a Marxist orientation. On the other hand, she admired people who did stand for what she thought were the poor, you know, the ordinary people or poor people, and stood for equality. And so that's why she admired Chou En-lai, who was a Marxist. She admired Castro, who was a Marxist. So I think that, you know, it wasn't completely, but it was the ideology. I think you're correct that they were not, she was not interested in that at all, and didn't want that to infiltrate you know, her thinking, and probably Nyerere's as well. So I think that, you know, that's in a judgment, but I think that it's probably a fair one. So, and then on the question of the dual citizenship, I can't remember all the whole, you know, I'd have to go back and look at it a bit more carefully, but it was one of the first laws that was passed after independence, was to allow for dual citizenship. So Barbara Johansson, who was one of her best friends, that's in fact how one of the reasons why I saw her so much, was that they were good friends, and we lived in Barbara's home in Mbezi later on, and so that was one of the reasons why I came into contact with her so much. Barbara was was then a member of parliament. She had helped Nyerere during the whole, you know, independence struggle, and then eventually became a Tanganyikan after they changed the law so that you could have dual citizenship. I don't even know that she was dual. I don't remember now if it was dual but she was Swedish, of Swedish descent, and she then ended up retiring back and going back to Sweden. But the law was changed to bring, because that first cabinet had quite a few. They had Bryson, it had there was also Lady Chesham, who was in parliament. There were quite a few foreigners, and so there had to be some mechanism through which they could become Tanganyikans. But I know Barbara was very much behind that legislation, and then she served several terms in the parliament. What else? The other questions. Yeah, I think that's all I can't say much about the Kabila situation. Yeah.
No, there was a question about the notes. The
notes. Yes. Thank you. I mean, that's I don't know who that question should be asked to, because I mean, she felt, I think her feeling was that they were her notes. And I suspect the reason there's an embargo, I mean, one has to just surmise this, is that there are things in there that she doesn't want people who are alive to read. And because it implicates people, probably. so she wanted, so she was protecting, or she's protecting Nyerere. She saw herself as protecting his image, and so perhaps there's also things about Nyerere in there, but clearly it belongs to the to Tanzania. It's Tanzania's history, and hopefully once the embargo is lifted, then somebody can copy the notes and take them to a library in Tanzania.
Yeah, you want to add, just for information, that the 30th year will be on the 4th of December, 2034.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
I also happened to visit Oxford, and I was told that the files were there, and she produced 2 copies.
Okay.
One for the Bodleian Library and one for Tanzania. But where exactly, when the embargo is
In Tanzania.
lifted, where in Tanzania they will be kept? My assumption it will be the National Archive.
We will not, because
but there is a file for Tanzania.
Mr. Bgoya met Joan 4 days before she passed away.
Oh.
And they had a discussion about the notes. Maybe we'll know where the notes are. Mr. Bgoya.
That's why I told you that sometimes I was in, although most of the time I was out. Well, this is actually an interesting thing. And there are 2 problems that I don't understand, because it is true, President Mkapa sent me to see Joan Wicken to say hello. They were friends, but also to ask her, to convince her, either to find a way that those archives are kept here, or maybe to have a shorter time of the embargo. By the way, do you see the irony of the whole thing? She embargoed stuff so that people won't discuss them. And now she has embargoed herself so we can discuss things about her without her being able to defend herself. It's ironic. Anyway, so I went to see her in the north there. And when I walked in the hospital where she was lying at the door like that, she was right there. She looked at me and sort of the distance, just say, "What the hell are you doing here?" And I say, "Came to see you." She said, "No, why would you? You are just in London." I said, "No. She said, "You flew from Dar es Salaam to come and see me." I said, "Yes, exactly." Of course, I went with a big bouquet of flowers. So she said, yeah, I said, well, at the end of the day, I gave her greetings from President Mkapa and Mrs. Mkapa, and we talked. There's a series of 3 days, and I sort of stayed like 2-3 hours every time I saw her. We discussed a lot of things. That was one of the things I said, look, she was very adamant. No, I cannot let these documents out now. But I know that Anna Mwansasu also went there specifically to do the transcription, because she was the one, according to John, who could actually read the shorthand notes that she had made. In fact, one of the things I hope that we could get from Anna Mwansasu today, had she come, would be to ask her, did you finish the job of transcribing the notes? Yeah. And maybe with a little bit, can you tell me what is she said about me? So, but obviously she couldn't make it. But now let me play a little bit of the devil's advocate. I think there's an obvious merit in keeping some of this work embargoed, because yes, even if my own notes about people, things, I wouldn't like them to see them because I call some people stupid, and silly, some things like that. So I wouldn't like them to know I call them silly because when I'm around, because they might do damage to me. But on the other hand, when you are dealing with the state matters that concern Tanzania, obviously, at some point, you are going to step on people's toes. For instance, one of the questions we talked about a lot when I met her was about the elections and who would be standing for elections. So when I gave her the names, she would say, "My God, even that one?" I say, "Yeah." No, because so now, can you imagine if that statement came about you? Even Saida. I'm just giving an example. You would obviously be offended. What do you think about me? So I think that's a kind of thing. But and on the other hand, you must understand these were her notes. These were actually her notes, because I think Mwalimu Nyerere also kept his notes, and the other people were there. Butiku, Babatao, and other people took their notes. So these were her notes, and copyright actually gives her those notes, not even the state. This is how it works. So one has to respect that. One would simply have to hope that, of course, when those notes come out, they will come out with other works so that the readers then can look at those notes and look at the other sources, like what we're publishing now. I think will probably be interesting for somebody reading those notes and they're looking at the work, for example, that Gwanza and Issa did, because that would be interesting. So that's what it is. I think that the one thing I must also emphasize, because I think it's important, we have to give it to John that kind of incredible self-abnegation, living in this little house in Salvation Army for all those years when she could have lived everywhere and so on. I mean, I wish we could have more people in our society now thinking of living in a 1 or 2 house villa instead of a 20-house villa, which seems to be, no, it's no longer fashionable 20 houses, but still big things, or maybe big cars. VX ngapi ya 870 milioni, with that kind of, maybe if we had more these leaders taking the example of John, our situation might be better. So
you think so?
Well, I got to think so.
Another round, maybe the last round. We have 15 minutes to go. And I have one question to both of them before. So I'll go to the audience again.
One question here.
Yeah, Karibu.
Asante sana for a very, very interesting discussion so far. My question is about how Joan was picked in the first place. Given Mwalimu's insistence on homegrown knowledge, homegrown excellence, Tanzania standing on its own feet, intellectually, resource-wise, etc. How is his head assistant a foreigner? Not that I have anything against it. I'm just wondering, what was the thought process, and what do you on the panel or anybody else think that implies about Mwalimu's thoughts on how leadership works? In other words, did he believe that leadership was necessarily Tanzanian to lead Tanzania, or could it be something more cosmopolitan? So I guess it's two-parted. How was she picked as a foreigner, and what does that imply about Mwalimu's own thinking of leadership structures? Asante.
Thank you. Any other? Yeah.
Any other questions?
And yes, Karibu.
One here.
Yeah.
Oh yes, that'd be fantastic.
Karibu.
Asante sana. My name is Vivian Mugwanja. I'm actually mtalii hapa, and 2 of my friends invited me to this incredible talk. Thank you so much. My question is actually about Joan Wicken and why she chose to go back to the UK for her retirement and later for her passing on. If she had so ingrained herself and her life and her work was here in Tanzania, here in Dar, and she lived in this beautiful villa, 1 bedroom with bougainvillea on the side, why did she choose to leave when she had reached her older years?
The last? Yeah, yeah. There is a question. Okay, we can take both of them. Yeah. You can use it.
Thank you. Can I start?
My name is Ninael Hosana Ole Sobai Mdundo. I'm an authoress. I once authored a book with an introduction by the late Mwalimu Nyerere. And Joan Wickens used to invite me to make appointments to see Mwalimu. I'm very happy to be invited here to say something. I heard that Joan Wickens shaped Mwalimu Nyerere's political image. But may I remind you that 18th October 1961, few months before our of Tanganyika independence, is Tanzania mainland. Sheikh Amri Abedi Kaluta, who comes from Kigoma, probably where our moderator comes from, assisted Mwalimu very well in the special sitting at the Karimjee Hall with members of parliament on avoiding or saving Tanzania from being an apartheid state, because there are of parliament, about 5, who were against those who were not Tanganyikans by origin, and those who were of Europe origin and India Asian origin, not to be accommodated in the cabinet and even to have Tanganyika citizenship. It is written by Judith Listowel, page 5 in Roman, and also in a book of Ahmadiyya Muslim on those who assisted Mwalimu. So may I say that the author of Joan Wicken's history should be aware that there was also other people who shaped Mwalimu. I'm having my here, and the moderator, I'll show the moderator and some other people that I was once with Joan Wickens when I was authoring this book here with an introduction by the late Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere. Nyerere was having several assistants and several advisors, not only Joan Wickens, but I am also proud of Joan Wickens that assisted Mwalimu Nyerere in all those years she worked with him. Thank you very much.
Can I have the last?
I just thought it's strange. My name is Aisha. I thought it's strange that you can't get closer than a secretary to the subject.
Can't hear.
And if this lady had spent some
Yeah.
I expected to have some little anecdotes, vignettes of Mwalimu's character, his likings, dislikes, preferences, that sort of thing. I thought being a diary, I would have thought those kinds of things should have been included. Another thing is the book itself, the shape of the book. It literally disintegrated in my hand. Yeah, sorry, this is not her fault. I think I'm pointing a finger. Yeah, mine is almost in tatters. I can't find it here, but it's sort of dropped from the spine and sort of floated around in different little pieces of paper. And I think the binding wasn't bad at all, wasn't good at all. Yeah.
That will hold yeah. So Ella, you have the mic there, yeah? Yeah, you can do it.
So my question, I guess I'm the last one, was that Joan knew him, said for such a long time, for 45 years, they worked together, they were so close. Was there in history any time where there was some sort of romance, that was maybe talked about? There been a chance of that?
Very good question. It was picked as well by Saida.
And
yeah, it is.
Everybody wanted to ask.
It is. So we start with you, Aili, and then Bgoya, if there is any, because there will be a last question. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the questions. So the first question was about why was Joan picked, given Mwalimu's, and what does it say that he picked someone like her when he was also insisting on, homegrown knowledge, and the Africanization policy was something that he promoted. I think it was just, I don't think there was any particular, agenda there. It was that she happened to have been, he had known her for a long time, and she then had helped set up Kibukoni College. And then he noticed, I think at that time, that he hired her to help write the independence speech, and realized that she could be an asset, in particular, not so much the speeches and so on that were given within Tanzania, but he needed somebody to be able to articulate it was Tanganyika then, but Tanganyika's policies internationally. When he went to speak to the UN or went to speak to international audiences, and do also some of the press releases in English. And so then there's the British Civil Service then had initially, because they were involved in the transition to independence. So they then had hired her initially to do that first speech for independence, and then he then hired her more permanently to put his ideas on paper in English. So it was a kind of a mutually acceptable arrangement. But there was also another Mrs. Wilson who was there too. And she was a secretary, and apparently she could type without making any mistakes at all. And in those days, that was, before computers. And so that was a valuable skill. And she had been his mother when he was studying at Edinburgh in England, in Britain, in the university. And her son was a friend of his. And so the family kind of took him in and were, hospitable to him. And so he then brought her husband died, and then he hired her to be a secretary. But those are the only two that I know of. And they were, and Nkrumah had the same, also for the same reasons. He also had a woman, Erica, I forget her name now, but it's in the book, who had also, he had hired, and then she went also to work in Guinea, I think, afterwards, I believe. Anyway, it's in the book. It explains who she was. So they weren't the only ones. Nyerere wasn't the only one, but she had just had a very specific skill set that I think was useful at the time. But it wasn't a policy or anything like that. And in fact, Nyerere was very concerned about Africanizing in general the government, and those policies did come quite soon after. But he was that you have to remember, and going back to that time, there wasn't like lots and lots of university educated people in general in Tanganyika. It wasn't like there was lots to choose from at that time. I mean, of course it changed soon after, but that was that was the early years. And so some of these things were difficult. Yeah, why did she go back to the UK? I think, well, she always kept her British citizenship. She felt she was British. She didn't, in that sense. I mean, it is kind of another contradiction or puzzle. Even for me, I think it's a bit strange, but that was, and I think she also had quite serious health issues. And by that time they had become quite serious. And she had, one of the things she negotiated in her contract, even early on, was that she would get British health care. So that was the only privilege that she sought in her initially, even right from the start. I completely agree. There were others that shaped Nyerere. I'm not trying to make any claims here that she was the only one by any means. And certainly other people that he worked with closely helped shape. But she was an influence. That's all I'm saying. And I just thought, because of the long-standing nature of their relationship, I thought that it would be important to highlight her role. And then finally on the romance, she was categorical. There was no romance. I mean, they were good friends. I don't even know that he was a confidant. She was a confidant to him, but they were friends, and and she was very, very loyal to him, and he was loyal to her. But it was a working relationship. It was an intellectual meeting of the minds. More than anything. I never got, and she was somebody who she was very straight in how she talked about things, that I'm pretty sure that I at least was convinced that there wasn't anything there, but there were plenty of rumors always, as there often are. So.
To you, good. And maybe because time is up, we're supposed to close at 6. I will also I'll add those questions. One thing that we get from this book is the confirmation of some of the things that are popularly known, but without evidence. They are known as rumor, but no evidence. So the more books come out of about Nyerere, they are being confirmed. And one of the confirmation that we get from this book was that Nyerere did not get a successor he wanted in 1985. The succession politics also are covered here. And you were there. You are old in the Bgoya, so you must know these things. And to some of us, we fail to understand, inawezekanaje mwalimu akakosa mtu anayemtaka? It is there. It is there. No, Aili asked Joan very direct questions about 1985. And Joan was so open that Mwalimu wanted Salim. And Aili repeated the question. I think she wanted to be sure. And Joan said Mwalimu wanted Salim. And Mwalimu did not get Salim. So can you explain? Because Mwalimu was very powerful, had the full control of the country, full control of the army, full control of the party, central committee. How could he fail to get the one he wanted as a successor?
This is it's a very difficult question. But one thing, by the way, I think you must notice in the book, Joan Wicken did not have influence on internal politics. Joan Wicken's specialty was foreign affairs and international relations. But actually, as far as domestic policies is concerned, you get the picture that she was left out, either deliberately or because she couldn't possibly follow or understand the politics internally, or the extent of it, most of which was not written in very nice books by intellectuals that you could read about, because the politics that made the difference in terms of whether Mwalimu got the choice he wanted or not, were internal politics about which Joan Wicken would not be conversant. Now, if you ask me why, I would also say I don't know, although I know. Let me explain you why I say that too. I don't know also because Mwalimu was so powerful, so well informed, but in the final analysis, politics is politics, and politics is the moment. And the Central Committee of the party, CCM, contrary to what is popularly believed, was not a rubber stamp of Mwalimu's wishes. The Central Committee those years was a proper Central Committee where there was debate and where if you lost in the debate, you lost irrespective of whether you were Mwalimu or not. Which means, therefore, it was democratic, but it was also made up of people who had very clear positions and representing very clear interests, which played out of the Central Committee and national politics that Mwalimu could not control or could not at that particular moment seize the moment. Because there are also nuances here, if you see what I mean. There is playing out a political situation over years, but there is also a political moment. Now, if you don't seize the political moment, you can lose a whole thing. Are you getting me? So I think now this is very subjective, this is my view, Mwalimu failed to seize the moment. He had the plan, but the moment he was not able to manage it because time also has this cruel thing about it. Either you do it at the moment or you miss it. Now, for those who can work it out, please work it out. But Saida knows more about this because, and the Kamata was a Kamata, and of course you, Babu. But before we go, I'd like to say something about which I really had contradiction with Joan Wicken. It's about publishing. Yes, I must say this. When I joined Tanzania Publishing House, this was a very poor place. And there was a book which was going to be published. I'm not talking about now, there are the earlier books, the Mwalimu, because for John, automatically it was Oxford University Press. I told you about being English, being quintessentially, culturally English. Oxford University Press, everything worth publishing comes from Oxford University Press. So Mwalimu Nyerere, obviously, Oxford University Press. Now, we had missed those, but then there came the dictionaries, Kamusis, Kiswahili Sanifu. Now when I heard about this book, I went to Nairobi, where I met Sheikh Abdullahi Nasir, who was then the editor of this Kiswahili Sanifu, who was also incidentally the editor of Mwalimu's books, in Swahili especially, and who also has a story to tell, but we don't have time. So then I talked to Abdullahi Nasir, said, how do we get this, the first intellectual property? This is the first intellectual work of this new country. How does it go to Oxford when we are there? You know. So I said, now we made a deal with Sheikh Abdullahi Nasir. And he said, Walter, if you can get this book out of Oxford University Press, and I think at that time either the contract hadn't been signed, he says, I will edit it for you for free. And then I had some friends of mine, Chinese, I went to them, they say, we'll print for you free. So now I say, I'm in business. So now I write to State House to ask them to do this book. Lo and behold, Joan Wicken writes to me and says, "Aha, Mambo, these things are, Mwalimu Nyerere does not concern himself with these things." Of course, I can't tell you who concerns with him things. And then she says, so it's already been done. It's been done. A month later, there comes an announcement. State House had given to OUP 220,000 shillings as subsidy to publish the dictionary. I can't tell you how mad I was. I mean, I was so, Oxford, I was mad at those who made it possible for Oxford. And I wrote a letter, sasa bahati mbaya sina nakala, kabazi langu is dead. But I wrote and said, tunajenga kwetu, tunabomoa kwetu, tunajenga kwa wenzetu na kwetu tunaporomoka. So, as I say, I got a beef with that. You know, because if we had just that one book, just that one dictionary, the first edition was 50,000 copies. And after that was 50, 70, 50. We would still be rich with that one book. Now, that's my beef as a publisher with Joan Wicken. There's another one about the old bomber, but that's another story. So what we are saying, I think we come back to where we're saying about gatekeeping, and not just the gate, the physical gate, but also what's inside in the other side of the gate. You know, but we all notwithstanding, I think John, by helping Mwalimu in his work in foreign affairs and writing speeches and being companions, all this great work, we must appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I think we will end up here. I just encourage you to, it's not big, but it has a lot of information, first-hand information, a primary information actually. And also it has a background from various studies that have been done and written. So I would like to hand the microphone back.
I can't hear, but can I just say thank you very much to the Honorable Zitto and Walter, and to the people who attended this talk. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed it, and I learned a lot from your questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And Mkuki, we have authors here. Eh? Yeah. We have. I've seen some. I've read their books. So maybe people like to have signed copies and things like that. So over to you. And thank you so much.
Thank you all for coming, and I just wanted to make a few housekeeping announcements. We have multiple authors in the room, as Mheshimiwa Zitto mentioned. Namona Dr. Kamata, Professor Saida Othman, the Kazimir Rubagumya. So please take advantage of the fact that they're here. We have a 20% discount on all Nyerere-related books today as a celebration of Nyerere Day, Kesho. So please take advantage of that. I also wanted to thank the Ridge Cafe. Jones has been gracious enough to get us so please help yourself to some coffee, help yourself to some juice. I think there are other there's some wine, and yeah, let's sort of get together, discuss some more, mingle, get to know each other, buy some books, of course. And yeah,